Welcome to the Undeniable Culture podcast, where we talk about the business of creativity and how culture guides what we create. Today, I'm joined by Ashton Edwards Butler and Karen Juarez, two amazing graphic designers and people that I've worked with for a long time now. Ashton is a bold creative that has had the opportunity to work on some amazing brands ranging from small local businesses to international brands like Jarritos and Neiman Marcus. Karen is a designer with experience in branding, packaging, web design, advertising, and UX. Originally from Mexico, her work has been recognized from local to national awards. Welcome to you both.
Great to be here.
I'm pretty excited to have you on the podcast.
I'm excited too.
I wanted to talk about kind of graphic design. And I know that our relationship has kind of started as me knowing you as graphic designers and being a kind of a project manager. And, graphic design is everywhere. And it's not until we started working together that I realized that, it had a name to it, what makes good graphic design, what makes bad graphic design. Ashton, why do you think graphic design is everywhere, but nobody notices it?
Well, they always say that, if nobody notices the design, you're doing it right. A famous example of this is the London tube system. They designed the wayfinding in such a way that it is very, very usable and people can navigate it. But because of that, they take it for granted. For example, we notice bad design, right? Like when we enter a situation and we don't have any idea of where we're going or how things function. Or a really simple example is like ordering at a restaurant, right? If the menu is bad, you have a horrible experience and you can't figure out what you want. If the menu is good, it's more seamless and you end up with like a happier end result. And you don't think about it when it's good, but you definitely notice it when it's bad.
Yeah. The experience is definitely something that you only recognize like the bad things when they're there, right? That really sucks.
Yeah.
I guess this kind of gets into the next kind of segment of this is how do you develop your creative eye when you kind of have something that you don't really recognize until somebody points it out to you, right? I think this and a lot of the positions in creative fields you kind of don't realize exists until somebody's like, hey, this exists. This is real. Karen, how do you kind of get into it? How do you develop that for yourself?
With a lot of practice.
Practice?
Yes. I remember a lot of people told me, you're really creative. You should go into graphic design. I was like, sure, I'm going to try it.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be really bad in school. But it was a lot of practice, a lot of projects that I had to do over and over again. So yeah, it takes some time.
Yeah, my experience was very similar. In fact, in school, we were always told to fuck up often and early and to fail harder because those were the greatest ways to learn. And like Karen, I sucked in the beginning. Like they were like, are you sure you want to be here?
Yeah.
It's like that old adage, practice makes perfect.
Well, actually, practice makes progress. Because if you try to aim for perfection, you will never finish a piece because you just keep working on it. Deadlines determine when you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's especially true for kind of the creative business world. This kind of intersect of creating something that's tasteful and artistic almost. And then you also have to really be in tune with the outcomes and what people are trying to get out of what you're trying to build. And that's a really important to kind of see that connection.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So practicing, right? So you guys have a lot of practice and have kind of had years of training. What got you from this, you feel kind of like, hey, I'm new to this. What got you to the next step of, I feel like I can do this confidently and I know I can do this for clients and projects that are real in this world?
Do you want to take that
question? Okay. So the honest answer is maybe that never completely goes away because every project's a little bit different. Even if you've done it before, the client and situation is different. So there's a lot of fake it till you make it, I think. And you learn and you get better at it and you fake it a little bit less every time. But every situation is definitely unique. And it just takes time,
Yeah.
really, and practice and messing up and learning the hard way.
Yeah.
And you learn from every project because it's a little different. So you adjust to the project and just keep learning.
I do recognize that a lot of times when we onboard projects, when we're on the account side of things, and then we're like, hey, this is kind of the outcomes and the goals, this is what we want it to do at the end. There's a lot of discovery, a lot of information gathering on your part, that you're doing a lot of research, not only on the client, but on the space as a whole. How do you feel that, what is your process to go from discovery to the final product? Maybe in time, maybe in effort. What's that process for each one of you?
Well, part of the reason I love design is that you become like a mini expert in the area of that you're working on. In college, I got assigned to do the packaging for ballpoint pens, and I got like ridiculously into the history of pens. I learned that the ballpoint pen was the first pen in space, because back then they were gravity well pens, and if you use them in space, they just would like the ink would come out and float. So they had to utilize a ballpoint pen. And that's one of those Jeopardy knowledge things that's never going to be useful, but I loved learning it. And it really helped me figure out like this unique design for the packaging of these pens that utilize like how can you use these colors and this like smooth line system and enhance your own work. And that actually ended up being in the Young Ones award show. So, I think it's that level of research and attention to detail that inspires you to make really something that's going to stand out on the shelf. Because it's really easy, I think, to go in there and be like, okay, that's in a little cardboard package with plastic on top. That's what everybody does, so I'm going to do that. And it would work. It's simple. It does the thing that it's supposed to do. It's not wrong. But how can you take that to the next level is really where that research comes in and pays off.
Yeah, I agree. I think research is the most important stage of the process, because that's how you like learn about the project and learn what makes it different and how to make it more unique.
Yeah. Learning about like front loading that work, on learning about what your client wants and who they are is really important too, I find. When we put in, together briefs that really explain kind of the project overall, that's what I see comes out the most. It's like the client has this thought about who they are and what they want and what it is that they're trying to get. So it's awesome to see how you kind of incorporate that into your research process, right? So moving on to like the graphic design element and how it plays into other roles, right? What do you think separates a graphic designer from art direction or an art director, or even maybe a creative director moving farther up into the process?
I feel like creative directors or art directors are more about the concept. Graphic designers too, but they are more focused on the concept, especially on big agencies or big companies. And also they do more of like telling people what to do, other people. That's what I think.
Yeah, I will also add to that and say that depending on the company you work at and its size, these titles really shift. Some people call themselves an art director, but they do creative directing, and it's just kind of depends on how the structure of the company is. And smaller companies, you tend to wear a lot of hats. But I think the main difference is, graphic designers create the graphics. Art directors direct like photography and commercials and the visual and theme of the situation. Like they make sure everything hits home. And then a creative director is similar to art director, but they're making sure that every creative aspect, is firing on all pistons, and that all of their creative team is doing what they're supposed to do. Because a creative director might have under them a graphic designer, a video producer, someone who's doing media buying, and they just kind of have to navigate all that.
Yeah, and copywriting as well.
Copywriting, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Very cool. And I know you have some experience with like different different size agencies and organizations at different levels. How do you knowing that there's a different mix, people have these titles shift from organization to organization. How do you think a graphic designer per se moves up in that ladder, or maybe even moves to a different section, right? Somebody who maybe started out as an art director was like, I really like graphic design. I should do this a little bit more. What do you think how that shift occurs?
I really think it's just like how people feel a need. You get in there and you find out you're actually really good at art direction, even though you went to school to be a graphic designer.
Mm.
And you just kind of fall into that. Um, in school, you learn everything that is the theory, right? And
Yeah.
then when you get into the practice, you find your own rhythm and your own niche and really get to it.
Yeah, I agree. When you're in school, things are a lot different when you're like actually working.
Yeah.
So yeah, things can change.
I agree 100% about that. Things do get a little bit different after you graduate, right? You realize that the need, especially today, to be agile, to fill, like you said, fill needs as they come up is really important. If you can do that, you're a lot more successful with your career and you can achieve a lot more with your team, right? Because you're flexible enough to do that.
Yeah, there's actually a big debate that I've heard a lot of people talk about. It's like, is it better to bring on several people who are really good at what they do, like someone who's really good at graphic design and someone else is really good at animation? Or do you want someone who can do all of it? And, in an ideal world, you want the graphic designer that can code and animate. But are you getting the same level of work that you would get if you had hired those roles individually? And usually the answer is no, because that person is kind of stretched thin because they're having to do all those things. And you can find people who are really good at it, but I'm going to say more often than not, it's better to find, your subject expert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As a person who actively has resource allocation, I have to determine where our resources are going to go and who's going to be where and doing what. I value an expert who can communicate effectively a lot more than a Swiss Army knife, right? Because they're able to effectively move projects from one stage to another. And that really helps the process overall. You get a better product when you have a collection of experts in what they do working together than somebody trying to do it all on their own. I think we've all experienced plenty of projects where it's just one person doing everything, and it's just like some things get kind of missed in the process.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, Ashton, I actually picked up a term from you early on, and it was, build a visual well. And, you have to build a visual well when you're in a creative field. Where did that term come from?
Actually, I got it out of college from one of my professors, and it was a concept he introduced early on because, we were newbies, and he was like, go out into the world, notice things, and not just graphic design, but like art and architecture and just anything that inspires you, and keep it in your head so that when you approach a project, you have all of these different sources of inspiration that you can utilize. Because, if you only take from one source, one pool, if you're only taking from graphic design to create graphic design, you're going to limit yourself. If you're looking at the whole world and being like, how can I weave in my own experiences, you push your artwork, and you also can tap into like something that's human, because we all share these experiences, right? And you can increase your chances of someone else looking at your work and feeling a connection to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I always, you bring so much of yourself into the creative field, right? You're even on the account side of things, right? You always have to be connected with what clients are doing and what the other creative teams are doing for other clients, and bringing that into your work is amazing because you get to do so many amazing things, right? But do you ever feel like that separation gets, a little weird? Sometimes people say, especially the old adage of don't bring your work home and don't bring your home, to work. Does that get complicated sometimes when you're building, creating?
I think so, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because, a lot of people don't consider themselves artists when you're a graphic designer, but it does come from a very artist place, and you have morals and passions. And so if someone asks you to do something that's kind of against your morals, you have to make a decision as a graphic designer. Do I take the money, or do I like stand up for what I believe in? And there's been a lot of circumstances where that's applied to me, even though, you know, I haven't been in the field like 40 years and I still experience that. Have you run into that, Karen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was an intern, and we had a client. I got photography together to use in their brochure for their living facility, and they came back and they were like, they put it in a different way, but they basically were like, we want everybody to be white. You know, and they said ethnically neutral, but I had since like all these different things, and they're like, no, too brown.
Yeah.
Which is awful.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe I was experiencing that in, you know, this day and age. And I was like, how can you have this client? I asked my boss.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't know, it pays the bills. And I was like, I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah.
And that happens so much in when you're kind of in this marketing advertising space, right? Because you're kind of really directly connected to the communication side of some of these organizations. And so we're kind of on the front lines of what that communication looks like for that particular client. And you are kind of the person creating that, and you, along with a copywriter and art director, are building that. That's so hard to have to kind of make those decisions, right? To be part of those decisions, right? And you maybe not have so much control over it.
Yeah, 100%. You have to kind of subtly decide how to amplify voices, because even if your client's not into it, like as a creative, you get that opportunity to kind of sway things to be, you know, a little bit more
Inclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about that, Karen, I wanted to get a little bit of your perspective of being a Latina creative and your relationship with graphic design, right? That diversity element, or what you bring from your culture and your experiences to your work.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a different country with a different language, different total culture. So at the beginning, I didn't notice that I was creating my work like it was different. But like a lot of people were saying that, yeah, I can tell you're from another culture because I was using different styles or things like that. But yeah, it's definitely been affecting my work.
Yeah. I saw some of the packaging that you did for Salvadorian cream, and as being a Salvadorian, and I was just like, this is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite projects because it was a Salvadorian and a Mexican cream, crema, and I had to really go into the culture and like reflect the I forgot the word. Hold on. Like the illustrations. And like I had to use like really popular places, things from the different cultures. So it's a really fun project.
Yeah. And I guess that goes back to like having to be a little bit of a mini expert on a lot of things, right? Because you had to probably do a lot of research, not only on the culture that you come from, but also a completely different one. And then, you know, it's part of the same brand. How do you, you know, then make it exist in the same universe almost, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was challenging because there were, again, two different cultures, and I still had to make the packaging cohesive. Yeah, I had to talk to a lot of Salvadorian friends. I remember posting on Facebook, someone that has time, I need help with a project. Yeah.
What did they think about you kind of do like that particular project when you brought it up, of why you were asking those type of questions?
I think the post was like, someone from El Salvador, please help me with this project, with a project. And there I got a lot of answers like, what's going on? What do you need help? I was like, oh, I'm doing this crema project for my work, and I just need to learn more about the culture, and I need to show you some images to tell me what you think. And they were really interested. They were like, oh, wow, I never been part of this. So they were really excited.
Yeah. You know, you don't recognize how much you don't know about your own culture until you're like tasked to research it and get information on it. I remember as a kid, you know, I grew up here in the States, and then my parents are from El Salvador, and having to learn about the culture that your parents are part of, even though you kind of interact with them all the time and they've brought their culture to the States too.
Yeah.
So it's always just academically or as part of a project, being part of that discovery is incredible.
You know what? It's interesting because in America, we have a whole lot of different cultures in one place, and we're a huge country, right? It's very different in Texas than New York and Wyoming,
Yeah.
and when you're designing a product, you have to take all of that into consideration and who's using the product and where they're from and how they live their lives. So, you know, whenever I was working on Jarritos, it was one of my first clients ever. It was kind of a big fish right out of college, and I was very intimidated by it. And these graphics were going to go out internationally, and I always worried about, like, is there a disconnect there since I'm not from that culture?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would, feel intimidating, I feel. And you bring up a great point that, even the things that you create, the things that you are developing are going to be seen by a very large audience sometimes. They're big brands, and you kind of have to understand the client and understand how to stay true to the brand, right? Because Jarritos is a very recognizable brand, and they're very, they have a lot of a cultural identity with Mexico and the Hispanic community, and staying true to them, their culture and their experiences and them as a brand kind of connects with a lot of people, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of brand loyalty to Jarritos as well. People would be like, Fanta ripped us off. So, like, you also have to speak to that, culture of the fan following. And there is one, and it's really interesting to interact with that.
Yeah. But that's going back to research is really important.
Yeah.
Because you have to know who's your audience
Hmm.
and how the product is going to be affected by your audience.
Yeah.
How they're going to see it.
So, I want to ask the question of, why should graphic design matter to the end user? Talking about kind of Jarritos and, we have these perceptions of these brands and how they play into our lives. Sometimes we don't even recognize that they are playing a little bit into our lives and what we do day to day. Why should it matter to the end user? And I'd like to add a little bit. How do you stay consistent across a long period of time with your brand as you're developing it? How do you make sure that the message stays true to that fan base?
I'll start by saying that, we don't design in a vacuum. We always take in consideration the full history of the product and the brand. We usually brands have a brand guide, and that helps, but sometimes they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to constantly compare what you're doing to what's out there to be consistent and carry over some of those key iconographies and colors, and that really helps push it through. When you're trying to evolve a brand and push a brand, that can be difficult because you have to be able to capture that initial essence, but bring it into like the modern world. That's why you see so many companies updating their logo in the last few years, because they're like, oh, it's time to update. And people get really upset. They're like, you paid all that money and it's worse now, or you barely changed it, because they don't like change. Like when Staples changed their logo, people are really upset.
Yeah, people do not like change.
No, but they get used to it, and then that becomes, the new staple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That probably gets into like how you kind of create something and you have kind of idea in your mind when it first gets developed, and you're concepting, and you kind of have to sit on that project for a little bit and come back to it to see what changed in your mind, or sleeping on it for a little bit, right? Does that happen to you?
A lot.
Yeah, definitely 100%. Sometimes I'll be working on something and I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. And I'll be really upset. And then I'll go to lunch and I'll come back and I'm like, oh, wait, this isn't so bad. Why did I think this was awful?
Yeah. It's always good to make a lot of concepts and like a lot of ideas. Because at the beginning, my professor used to say, just get out the bad ideas out. Just get them out.
Yeah.
And then there's times where you go back and you like something and you like make changes and it works. So, yeah.
Or like on the other hand, you think something's going to work and then you get it into Illustrator and you're like, oh no.
Something works great on paper and it sucks on the computer.
Yeah, that happens. It definitely happens. But you're right. You have to get past that awkward stage, and you have to be not afraid to suck, because that's part of it. Sucking is, part of the creative process. People think it's like this confident thing that you do from beginning to end, but there's a whole lot of fear and confusion and like, should I start over? Should I push this? And is this just bad? Should I give up? But you don't. And you're like, here's my 300th sketch.
Yeah.
And you finally land on something. And occasionally that weird thing that you thought was bad ends up being like the most awesome thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That you guys make it look effortless, to be honest.
It's not.
You should look our Illustrator file.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Whenever I met Karen, she has this system of having a playground file and then a file that's the final. And you'll see it in our folders, like it'll be marked PG or F, and there's such a difference.
Yeah, that's where we have fun and just try things.
And it's messy, messy, messy.
It's great to hear that you guys also have like a sandbox method to how you develop stuff, right? A lot of people, wish for that experience, or maybe do have that experience in other fields, but that experience always leads to better design, better ideas, better concepts at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I'll say that like working with somebody else makes it better too.
Yeah. Getting feedback. Because sometimes you see something and you're like, it doesn't look good, it sucks. And the other person is like, no, you should try this. And you're like, oh my gosh, something so simple, but I didn't think about it. And it solves my problem.
Just a different perspective. When I first got out of college, I would always like miscenter things. Like it would be off just a little bit and I couldn't see it. But then people would be like, you need to move it 4 pixels to the left. And I was like, oh yeah. And you learn to see that.
Yeah. I'm always super amazed when you guys talk about like how pixels, work and how close you need to be. And then I was just like, I've never thought about that such a small unit of measurement.
Yeah. Just takes practice, a lot of practice.
Oh, yeah.
It definitely does. I worked at one client where they had to machine some of the things that I designed, and you had to zoom in like 6,400% and get those pixels lined up perfectly.
Yeah.
Or the machine cut it wrong. And you'd have to start all over.
That gets into like how the end user maybe will recognize the fact that it's maybe they'll recognize that maybe it's off a little bit, right? And that's kind of very unconscious of us, right? But it's going back to like the recognizing that people will recognize bad graphic design, bad design in general, when they see it, and maybe not recognize good graphic design when they see it. How does psychology play into what you create and how that comes about?
I think psychology is everything in graphic design.
Yes. A lot of people don't like think about it, but it's there. Like with colors, with typography, there are things that are really important and affect your design.
Yeah.
They add to the emotional connection. Human beings are 2 things. We are very, very emotional, and our brains are immediately drawn to problem solving. So if we can hit those aspects in our designs, it makes people engage with it. So for instance, blue is considered to be a very friendly color and clean and often associated with technology. And if you think about a lot of the companies that use blue, they tend to be like clinical or technology based. Or a famous example is McDonald's. They use yellow and red, and studies have shown that when you use those colors together, it makes you hungry.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you wouldn't think that color would have that much effect on people, but it really does. We're really drawn to that.
Yeah. You don't really recognize it until you don't recognize it until somebody tells you, right?
But we've all experienced it, right? Everybody's walked into a coffee shop, and if they have like a bold blue on the wall, it makes you feel one way versus like a really calm lavender wall, right? It changes the atmosphere completely. And we just don't realize it.
Yeah. But like people, graphic designers work on that and like they think about that and the users don't. So that's how we know it works.
Or like there are certain fonts, right? If you get a tall, skinny font, it can make you think something's like kind of urgent. Like Babus, the first time I used that was in a post about the use of medical marijuana in an ad for a magazine. And that was the first time that I was like, oh, wow, font can really make you feel something.
Yeah.
Because it kind of emphasized the message through, the way the font is structured.
Fonts has always been a very interesting relationship with, how I feel about fonts, You're like, you grow up, reading comic books and you're like, Comic Sans. That's
Yes.
a good font. And then you talk to graphic designers and they're like, Comic Sans is shit.
Yes, don't use it.
Do you remember when Avatar came out and people were so upset because the subtitles were in papyrus?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I as a teenager, I grew up at my parents' restaurant, and I hate to say it, but I used papyrus in building my parents' menu.
Oh, wow.
Oh, we've all been there. My first job was at Home Depot, and they used to make me make flyers on the computer, and I did it in Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, and I did some atrocious things looking back on it. But at the time, I was super proud of it. I was like, look at me using word art.
Everybody starts somewhere,
Yeah.
Get your visual well created, and like Karen said, you got to get all the bad ideas out.
But that does bring up something. There's this tendency in designers to always want to do high design, to be as, artistic and smart about it as you can. But sometimes that doesn't communicate to the customer or demographic right. And you have to be like practical about your approach. Because if you're going for something super aesthetic, super modern, and it won't connect.
Yeah.
And
it's like that being human-centric in your approach to design, to creation, to making things for people.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So kind of our final element here that I want to talk about is some of the works that you're most proud of. How did they come to be? What did you contribute to the project that made you feel like, man, I'm really proud of this work?
For me, we already talked about the project. It was sour cream. I was involved in that project from the beginning, from the start to the end. I come up with the concept, the illustrations, the layout, and I was there to make sure the packaging was right. And I remember I was like drawing on my iPad. I was drawing tacos. And I was like, I can't believe I'm getting paid for this. But it was a really fun project. And I was really excited when I went to the store and I saw it on the aisle.
Got to purchase something that
I bought like 5 bottles of each just to have them.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Did you keep the bottles?
Yes, I still have the bottles.
That's funny because when I was an intern, some of my Harita stuff went out to Walmart and my mom stole it. It was just a little aisle marker thing.
Oh, okay.
And she was like, my daughter made this. And
I thought she stole like the Harita.
No, it was just like a little cardboard thing. And I was like, Mom, you can't do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You see those like, cardboard cutouts and all those awesome designs of movies when you go to the movie theater. I've always wanted to just like take one with me, put it up in my house.
Oh, yeah. Me too.
Yeah. But what about you, Ashton? What is a project that you're really proud of? How did that come to be?
Does it have to be a professional project?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so I really struggled in college. I had to pay my own way. I was very stressed about it. And when I got to design school, I had originally gone to be an illustrator, but they had dissolved that program. So I had to go to design. I had no idea what design was. No idea. And I was enrolled in it. So for me, it was a really hard curve, and I was failing. And then one project, I finally started to get it. And it was a poster for a jazz festival. And I had watched all these documentaries about jazz and taught myself to watercolor. And when I brought it into class, the teacher, for the first time ever, was like, wow, you really did something. And I remember just being on cloud nine because it was like the moment it all clicked for me. And I kind of went home and just collapsed because I've been trying so hard. And even though I've done like way bigger projects since then that actually have like stakes, because I was just in college, it was just for me, right? That's still something that holds dear in my heart because of just like the emotional struggle that went into it.
Yeah. It does take a toll when you're struggling to grasp something, but the relief you get when you understand it, you know what's going on, you can move to the next step. So gratifying.
It really is, yeah.
So thank you so much for being part of the podcast and joining us today. We got to learn a lot about graphic design, about the creative process, and how really cool things get made, right? Hopefully we'll have you on the podcast again soon. We'll obviously, see each other. All right. So thank you for listening today. We hope you enjoyed learning about Ashton and Karen. For notes and information on what we discussed today, head over to undeniableculture.com. There you'll also find more episodes as they come out. Stay cultured, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.